Good evening to this session, the best book appreciation session organized by the Thomas Mitani Center of Family Business, Family Enterprise at the Indian School of Business. So I'm Kavil Ramachandran. I'm called generally Ram. I'm the executive director of the center, and I will have the pleasure of introducing this book, and we will have a conversation with the author himself, Mr. Sunilkant Munjal. I discovered that this book has already been a bestseller. In the very first week of its release, it became a bestseller. It remains top of the chart. And so it's an amazing book. I enjoyed reading it fully. And this is a book on the story of the Hero Group, how led by the legendary Mr. Brij Mohan Munjal and his brothers started from scratch and built a huge industry of starting with bicycle and then going into the two-wheelers and things like that, which is also a history of the transformation of the Indian industry per se, since independence. I mean, as the industry changed, and in many ways, the Munjals were pioneers in many respects, in terms of industrial practices, in terms of building the industry, in terms of relationship building, philanthropy, family relationship, many areas. So this book is talking about the hero story and the people behind it. So what we will do is to have a glimpse into the story through a very short video. Okay, so this is about the making of Hero. So let's start with that. Anshul.
From the bylanes of Kamalia and the rugged landscapes of Quetta, they escaped to India with little more than the shirts on their backs. In the partition-ravaged cities of Amritsar, Agra and Delhi, 4 of the 6 Munjal brothers, Dayanand, Satyanand, Brij Mohanlal and Om Prakash, built their business part by part. Armed with nothing but self-belief, the brothers began with trading and then manufacturing bicycle parts, which soon evolved into the production of bicycles. For post-independence India, the Hero bicycle gave wings to the aspirations of the common man. By 1986, 30 years after its inception, Hero Cycles became the largest bicycle maker in the world. In the next 15 years, the motorcycle venture, Hero Honda, repeated the feat, and both pole positions are held firmly even today. Hero's story is about humble beginnings, the refugee entrepreneurial spirit, hard work, and zeal. It looks at how 4 brothers with little formal education created a world-class enterprise. This is the incredible tale of a principle-driven organization that created exceptional value for a society that desperately needed transportation. How did 4 brothers with distinct personalities work like a cohesive unit and build a manufacturing behemoth? How did they synchronize their strengths? How did they resolve their differences, if any? The story goes deep inside the family spirit, the parivar. that brought together employees, customers, channel partners, suppliers, and local communities to create success, welfare, and well-being for millions. This is the making of Hero. 4 brothers, 2 wheels, and a revolution that shaped India.
Excellent. Excellent video, and it captures the essence of it. So let me now introduce the man behind the book, Mr. Sunil Kant Munjal. I mean, very briefly, his profile is very, very rich and very long. Very briefly, he is part of the founder family of the Hero Group, which started from scratch and then became the largest bicycle manufacturer and the largest in terms of two-wheeler industry. He is also currently the chairman of Hero Enterprises. And true to his personality, diverse interests, the enterprise is into a variety of activities, including insurance distribution, steel making, real estate, corporate training, but beyond that, into startup, new generation industries, businesses, plus women empowerment and corporate training, a variety of things he is into very actively. And also he chairs the board of that runs the Doon School. And also I have been very fortunate to have met and interacted very closely with Sunil many times as the board member of the Indian School of Business, where he has been part of the promotion, the team that got inspired and started the school in 2001. So he's also on the boards of the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, as well as the Sri Ram College of Commerce. Besides, he co-founded BML.
ఇప్పుడు వీళ్ళిద్దరు తప్ప ఇంకెవరో కనిపించరా వీడియోలో?
Hello. He has co-founded the BML Munjal University and is the president of the Dayanand Medical College and Hospital, Ludhiana. He has served as the president of the CII and All India Management Association. He's been a member of the Prime Minister's Council of Trade and Industry. Besides that, he has varied interests. So he has also, he's very actively into art. So he has set up the Serendipity Arts Foundation, which aims to revive patronage in the art. So welcome, Sunil, to this session. It's a real pleasure to have you, and it's my privilege to speak to you, discuss with you the book, which is phenomenal. Okay, so first of all, congratulations to you on the book. Given your varied interests and very, very busy schedule within the business, outside the business, social circle, philanthropic circle, policy circle, and everything, how did you find time to write this book? And that too, it has come out so well. I'm sure the people, the audience has seen this book. So in the video also it is there. So please tell us, how did you manage to that, which is a great achievement.
So first, thank you. Thank you very much, Ram, for that very generous introduction, and thank you for doing this. And likewise, I have enjoyed my conversations with you on multiple occasions.
Thank you.
Both on management and business management, and especially on family-owned business management. And we have been together on a few panels earlier as well. So I guess when you are involved in so many things, you don't actually have to do any one thing. You can always tell people you're busy doing something else. But more seriously, I think it is about priority, your own interest. Whatever you are passionate about, you will find time to do this.
Right.
This book has been in the making for a very long time.
Mhm.
For many decades now, the request to write a book about the company or the family or a combination had come multiple times. I may not be wrong if I say it came over 100 times from different places, different institutions, etc. And my father would always say, no, that's not the right thing to do. It's not nice to talk about yourself. And this went on for many, many years. Finally, I think when he was over 90 already, I sat him down one day and I said, look, this is not about you. It's not about us. It is about learning for many other people, because what has been achieved in one generation is almost unimaginable. As you said, literally starting from scratch and building a multitude of businesses, with many of them which are global leaders. There are many lessons to learn. So he actually agreed. He's saying, okay, if that's how you feel, then let's do this. And we picked somebody to write this book. Unfortunately, the people we picked were busy and they wanted time to come back and do the book later. Unfortunately, by the time they came back, we lost my father. And so it stopped there. But these requests to write the book still kept coming.
Mhm.
So I thought about it. I said, since he had already agreed, the book should be written. But frankly, who would know more about what's going on rather than an insider? So which is why I decided to do it myself. And I found time, late nights, weekends, holidays, travel to put things together. So it was a bit of an adventure for me as well, putting information together. But please remember, this goes back well before partition, before I was born. So it was also a little bit of a discovery for me.
Yeah, it's not. One thing I know that I have experienced in my writing experience is that writing a book is very, very difficult. Writing a book that communicates well, and also you have to make it tight, and editing it. It's absolutely wonderful. I mean, it's not at all easy. Okay. And if you have completed that too, capturing everything from partition. And also one more thing I found is that you have simultaneously captured the evolution happening within the country.
Yeah.
The changes in the industry scenario kind of.
So the idea was to talk about the family.
Hmm.
It's actually written in concentric circles. It's written as a series of stories. It's strands of stories which kind of tie in together.
Hmm.
It's a story about the family, story about the company, story about India, its economy, and a little bit about what's going on in the world. So all of them kind of get tied in together with each other. And when we introduced this subject, we picked HarperCollins to do the publishing. So they actually asked me, the gentleman who was the chief publisher from their side, he actually asked me, he's saying, who do you want to write it for?
Right.
What is this story about? And who is it for? Who is your audience? So I thought about it a little bit. I said, look, our purpose was to get it to as wide an audience as possible, because this is not only a business book. It's not only a family book. It's not only an economy book. It's all of those and more.
Yes.
So if this can be read by a business manager, a business student, an entrepreneur, a lay person who has nothing to do with business, I would imagine then we are successful. And fortunately, the response that we have been given by the publishers and feedback is showing that it has been appreciated. So I'm hoping and I imagine that it's gone to a wide audience, because the
I mean, whomever I have spoken to, some of my team members who have read the book also. I mean, one is that all of us have heard about your father, and also about the family, about the group. But there are a lot of very, very interesting things that has happened through the history. And so therefore, from that angle, I think everybody should be grateful to you for taking this plunge and completing it. And when you said your father was reluctant to talk about himself, it's seen the book, how humble he was, and humility was hardcore for the family, not to speak about themselves. Let's do karma, and then that's the essence of it. Now, I have a request to the audience. If you have any questions, you can write in the chat box. And what I will do is that intermingle pick up some of the questions from there. And so therefore, we won't keep a separate time for Q&A. So therefore, the conversation will be interactive. So I will be actually representing you in terms of asking Mr. Munjal the questions. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. So I think that's I mean, I read with a lot of emotion. So when the book talks about the partition and the severity of it and the challenges of traveling at that time, I've seen it in the Gandhi film, but some of these things are captured so well. So the beginning part, what I wanted to find out is that why did you choose bicycle?
Yep.
Okay, at that time, yeah.
Sure. No, it's a good question to ask because that's what the business got built on. So it's a very relevant question to ask. So basically, what happened was that at a reasonably young age, my father and two of his brothers worked in Quetta in the British Ordnance Factory. And for some strange reason, the Ordnance Factory used to train people on guns and on bicycles. So they had some training on bicycles in the Ordnance Factory already. And then subsequently, later on, two of my uncles in Amritsar were doing a bicycle parts trading business. It's a different matter. They got cheated. Some of the stuff got stolen, but they had actually got the exposure and the experience in bicycle and bicycle parts from there. So that was one thing they already knew. They had done a couple of other things, but this was a business or products or engineering that they were familiar with. So when they finally, after partition, when they moved around to many places, they went to Delhi, Agra, Panipat, and then finally, two of them first settled down in Ludhiana. And Ludhiana and Malerkotla already had some industry or some manufacturing of bicycle parts. So it was somewhat the experience they had and somewhat coincidental that these things came together. And that's how this started.
Yeah, I find that a lot of, I mean, what I say, the latent demand kind of assessment of it from the very beginning, because at that time, a huge shortage was there. And especially when you don't have that kind of a capital or resources are not easy and you unpredictable future and all. One of the other interesting things related to bicycle is that I found the current terminology is the design thinking. Okay, so the elements of it there itself, because the family, your brothers, your father and uncles started with designing it, keeping the customer in mind, what kind of customer is there, where they are, what kind of requirement they will have. So, which is the essence of design thinking. Iteratively work with the customers and then design. So, can you think about this? I mean, how did this actually happen? Any idea you have?
Sure, of course. So there are two or three different aspects to this. One is that part of the family upbringing was based on good values. So they were actually very good on their commitments. Even when they started the business, when they were not manufacturing themselves, they were only trading. They developed a very good reputation quickly because they would always fall good to their word. If they made a commitment to somebody to supply, they would make all the effort to supply. They were always good on their payment dates. So that started one initiative where the customers pushed them to do more and more and more. The second was actually common sense. If you think about it, many of the current contemporary governance practices were actually being practiced 50 years ago in this organization. Many of the current management practices were also being practiced started, some of them 40, 50, 60 years ago. The reality is, when you break it down, all of these are real common sense. And by the way, my father and his brothers did not have a great deal of educational exposure. They did not finish college. And some of them did not even go to college. So it genuinely was part natural instinct and part common sense and part quick learning on the fly that I think made them think, because for them, the customer and the people working with them were actually the key to everything. Relationships were important. So when they spoke to a customer, they wanted to ensure that the customer is actually happy, not just once, but comes back again and again and again. And so if you're listening to customers, you will end up doing the right thing. And you listen to both things that they say, and very often the things that they don't say sometimes become even more important.
Absolutely. My research on entrepreneurship, from many years back. So I had observed that customer dissatisfaction, explicit or implicit, most often they don't, as you said, but they don't explain. But if a good entrepreneur can observe the customer dissatisfaction and find a solution to that, then there is a pull coming from the market. And that's what I found in the whole book, that and that enabled the group to become the largest, very efficient. And I mean, there are various aspects. I'll come to some of those things. But before getting into that, I just wanted to find out, how did you come to the brand name Hero? So the book talks about that also.
I've actually spoken about this in the book.
Yeah.
You know, when they used to do this bicycle trading business in Amritsar, and when this transition was taking place between India and Pakistan, people moving both sides. So one of the people they used to deal with used to make saddles, bicycle seats, an elderly gentleman. And he was actually using this name. So they asked him, they said, we would like to use this name. He's saying, first, you can, of course, use it. And second, I'm even in any case going back to Pakistan, I will not be here. I don't even know if I'll do this business. So you can just take it and use it. In those days, you know, one did not need to make great IP agreements, etc. Of course, today we protect the brand, we build the brand, we nurture it. But it was a simple transaction of trust and friendship between two individuals, which actually allowed us.
Also, Sunil,
Yeah.
I think from a different angle,
Yeah.
that actually had sort of a positioning message
Yes.
that it is a hero. Hero means that whatever products, whichever market you are, or
Correct.
whatever relationship you have with either with the supply chain or anybody, you have to be a hero. Means that you are already defining the benchmark, isn't it?
And that's the way the company has genuinely worked, by the way.
Correct.
To first looking at Excel in all that it does, whether it's procurement, manufacturing, design, engineering, distribution, public service, in all areas. Our attempt always has been, whatever you do, you must do well.
Right.
Spend time in coaching yourself, training yourself to learn. So we insist all the time, all the people are constantly learning and also unlearning some old practices as environment and technology changes. So this was a practice actually started early on. And you're right. Therefore, the Hero also is an easy name, and there is no language in it. It has a negative meaning at all or a connotation. And it's almost around the world you can understand the term hero.
And even in remote villages, people are used to the term hero, so it is easy to remember. All the sort of connotations one attribute to defining a brand name are there. Okay, let me move to the. There are so many things to discuss. So let me move to another very interesting part I observed is the practice of JIT, just in time. Okay. So when it became a fad, I would say in the 80s and all, when Japan brought it to Toyota production system and etc. But much before that, I mean, you mentioned that it was all common sense. I think that's what they applied. So I mean, I'm keen to find out what was the logic and what was some of the unique features were. I mean, you have discussed some of these.
Let me go a step behind this, how it happened and why it happened.
Correct.
So, as you know, because by the time they settled in Ludhiana, they still did not have large resources because they literally left everything they had behind. They actually came with nothing. So, as it said in that small film, they came literally with just the shirts and their bags, because some of them were actually on the last train which came into India. And when they settled down here in Ludhiana and they started making bicycle parts and then bicycles in 56, they found pretty soon that you could not make as many bicycles as you could sell, because at that time, during British time, all critical value add components would come from England, from brands like Raleigh, Philip, etc. So even the parts for bicycle like hubs and rims and tires and wheels and free wheels, everything was imported. They would come through agency houses. So the family said, this is not okay. This won't do. We believe we have relationships in the market. There is a need for this product. We can actually sell more. But when we go to the agency, you get a quota. It was like they would ration them out. So if you got 1,000 tires, you could only make 500 bicycles. So they started talking to family and friends and said, if you would like to start a new business, we can help you pick the component, even pick the machines and how to make it. There are two things we will not do for you. We will not fund this business for you, and we will not run this business for you. So you must run it yourself. And also remember that outside of this room, we may be cousin, family, or friend, but once we are inside, we are business associate. So please, let's behave. So arm's length pricing, all of that started at that time. The related party transaction processes were put in place then. And they also said, we don't have a lot of money, so supply only a little bit every day so that we can actually pay you in time. So things would come in every day, get processed and manufactured every day, and also get shipped out every day. By the way, we had built no warehouse in our manufacturing companies. Some years back, we restructured the group. And at that time, we had 32 companies in the group. And not one of the manufacturing companies had a warehouse or a godown. And by this time, 8 of the companies were global leaders already. Even at that scale, none of them built a warehouse or a godown. So just in time became a part of the lifeblood of this organization. Starting off as a compulsion, it then became a discipline, and then a process, and then an advantage. It allowed the company for many, many decades to run a negative working capital cycle as well.
Right. And that's possible only when there is a pull coming from the market.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So otherwise, the pressure on the working capital will be there.
Correct. So no credit was given in the market either.
Yeah.
So dealers were only supplied if they had paid for the previous supply. They wouldn't
and also in some cases, I think they were paying in advance so that they would be assured of the product. And yes, there were several instances like that.
Yes.
And it also means that I've been building up that kind of a relationship with the suppliers as well as on one side and the dealers on the other side would have been, part and parcel of the whole expansion process. It's working on multiple fronts simultaneously. Yes. So, can you elaborate on some of these, or are there some interesting, at least a couple of anecdotes of the relationship building? Because huge relationship building.
This is part of the core philosophy of the organization, that everything, the entire universe was looked at like a one family. So whether you were a supplier working inside the company or a dealer or a distributor, this was all considered one large family. So information sharing was very, very good. And sharing of pains, if anybody had a problem, then they were supported. This happened all the time. In one day, one of our dealers in Ludhiana itself had a theft in his place. My uncle, Mr. Op Munjal, had relationships which were wonderful with all the dealers, and he knew every dealer by name, etc., which was one of the core strengths of the organization. And he went to visit the dealer. Before he reached his home, he had already found out how much was stolen. He told the office, he told the accounts guy, write a check out for this dealer for this amount, just send it to his accounts office, so it's in his account. When he went to their place, he's saying, what's the problem? What's happened? The guy was looking sad. He was crying. He's saying, "Bahut nuksan ho gaya, ye ho gaya." He's saying, "Kahan nuksan hua hai? Kiska nuksan hua hai?" Because the money was already, and it was nothing to do with us. It was nothing to do with the company. And the same thing happened when another dealer had a truck get burnt, because once the trucks left the factory, they belonged to the dealers. That was the official legal position of the goods. Dealer's truck got burnt in transit. And somebody was sent from Ludhiana to go and check. And when he confirmed that these goods are frankly not recoverable, without asking the dealer, a brand new truck filled with the same bicycles was sent the next day from the factory. And I can give you hundreds and hundreds of stories.
I know. And the book also talks about several such instances where your father went for the CII meeting in Bangalore, and how he slipped out of the meeting and things like that, and visited some of the families.
In any place he would go, by the way, in any city he would visit, a meeting or a visit to the dealer, to the dealership, or to the dealer's home was an absolute given. There was no question that it will happen or not. It just got, and some cities, when they had lots of dealers, then they would all get together at one place. And that was considered
It's
an
amazing.
essential requirement almost.
Yeah, and also which means that you have the contract written on paper, but that's not what
This
what
has
is
nothing to do with the
required.
contract, by the way.
Absolutely,
No
absolutely.
contract of a business would require you to do any of these things.
The trust is the fundamental thing.
Yeah. This is based on, again, the belief that this is all about human beings, and it's all about the relationships that you will build. These relationships are the ones which benefit you when times are good, and they also benefit you when the times are not good.
Absolutely, absolutely. But one question I have been debating is that as the network expands, when it is small, when you have 100 dealers, 200 dealers, you can manage. When you have thousands of them, how do you manage that? Is there some principle you have applied that using technology or something?
Let me give you incidents before technology came in. Okay. Of course, now we have all these very sophisticated systems operating. We were the first bicycle company in the world to use an ERP system. And by the way, we went right to the top. We got an SAP system installed. Even our two-wheeler motorcycle company became the demo site for SAP as the quickest installation, most efficient installation, etc. We had a very interesting system. We had these sales. They were called sales agents, but they were actually employees of the company, part of the sales team, who would travel across the country every day to visit different dealers. Each day they would plan to visit 2, 3, 4 dealers, go to the next town, next city. Each one had a region. And every single day in the evening, that sales agent would fill up all these meetings of the day in a postcard. If you remember, in the old days, we had those postcards.
Yes.
At one point, it was 5 paisa, then it became 15 paisa. Postage on that. He would write each dealer's situation. What is the stock? What is the market like? What is the problem? What's good? What's not good? And any feedback, and just post it. So 2 days later or 3 days later, it would be in the head office. So the company had current information on every single dealer, which was only 3 days old, all the time.
And they would have been
all before any sophisticated communication tools were available in India, by the way.
And I'm sure there must have been some sort of a intuitive mechanism to compile these things.
Oh, yeah. There was this amazing, again, on both my father and uncle's desk, we had these wonderful, thick, like ledger-looking type registers which used to sit, which used to get this information was collated in there. So if you open that, it was like a digital record today. So it was all available. Of course, like I said, today, all of these tools are being used in all the companies. But I'm just talking even before they came in. How human innovation was being used to stay connected.
Yeah, which also shows the extent of concern they had for the extended family or the partners, wherever they are. And it's not only the money transaction, but also the family because it's very important to take care of the entire, the clan or the community per se. I think that's what the essence of it like that.
No, that was, by the way, an almost, again, essential thing. Not only did my father and my uncles know the dealers and the suppliers, but if anybody had something, and they would know, by the way, their children, they would know where the kid goes to school, who's got a problem going on. When somebody's getting married, definitely someone from amongst the family would go and visit. But even more importantly, if there was a mishap in any family, if somebody passed away, someone not well, 100% guaranteed someone from the senior management would be there. And essentially, attempt was to get from the family. If not, one of the senior managers would be there. But this was an important part of the relationships that were retained. And we have many of them, by the way, who are now second or even third generation working with us in a number of businesses. Since you mentioned the insurance distribution business, so this is a business that my daughter looks after. So we had a dealer conference going on the other day, which I was addressing. And I mentioned exactly the same point I made that day, that, we have so many of you are our strength, and so many of you are working with us second or third generation. There was a young man who kept raising his hand, jumping up and down. I said, is there some point you want to make? He said, sir, I'm fourth generation working with you.
That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. And let me...
We've been fortunate, I have to say. We have not always been smarter than competition, etc. We have been fortunate. Many times we happen to be right time, right place. And I think the goodwill in the system helped with this as well.
But it's also possible, although, I mean, I would say that to a great extent, you are humble to say that it was, I mean, you are lucky to have that kind of a thing happening. But I don't believe that it can happen automatically all the time. I mean, one can be lucky once or twice, but always, unless there is that value system, the belief that it is possible to do it, and we have to do that conviction. And otherwise, I don't think it would have.
No, you're right. And also, as it gets larger and larger, it becomes more and more difficult because just the sheer scale and volume requires you to be at one place or the other place. And if something's happening in 20 dealers' families at one time, because there are now thousands and thousands of them, both across the country and across the world. And so this is very much part of the ethos with which they were working, which actually made it probably easier for them to do than it would have been otherwise.
And also, you mentioned that your insurance business, which Shefali is running, has a the fourth generation member, which also, I mean, I would interpret that you follow the same kind of a pattern or the same kind of a principle in terms of building the community.
Yeah. So what we did, Ram, was that in the early days, I guess when my father and uncle started, it was instinctive. It was just them, then along with one or two other people. So their behavior became the business behavior. Their philosophy became the business philosophy. Subsequently, when our generation came in, we tried to follow the same. But as the companies grew, we started documenting these as written principles on which we will work. So now it's like the core philosophy. And now the group has restructured twice over, and the number, of course, is much larger. Number of companies that distributed across geographies and businesses. Now, some of them follow this still. Some of them follow it. Let me correct myself. All of them follow it in some degree or the other.
Right.
Some it's more, some it's less. But by and large, you can see a hint of this everywhere. So the thread is there, even though the group is restructured. Many different people are in decision-making positions. And so we have attempted to maintain that philosophy as much as we can. I don't think we do as much, plus the environment has also changed.
True.
We all used to have almost no attrition in our companies. For many, many decades, we used to say anybody who joins the group is actually going to retire from there. They would never leave. And not only would they not leave, once they finished in the company, they would go and join one of the social projects, because as a family, we run schools, colleges, hospitals, clean drinking water projects. We run all kinds of them. And most of them are run by people who were earlier senior managers in the companies.
That shows that the commitment or the shared values among the employees also. And also the lot of, I believe that a lot of social context. The social context also influences the decisions or the behavior of people. I mean, lifelong employment to career orientation, moving. So it's a lot. Even if you try to adhere to that, you see that that's not 100% possible like that. But correct. I have another interesting question. Okay. Yeah. The book talks about your late brother, Raman.
Yes.
He took the initiative in terms of talking to his friends, encouraging them to set up ancillary units. Yep. And then that was the beginning, and there were many other friends and relatives who came and set up. So when I talk to many people, including in many families, they say that don't have anything to do with relatives, or don't have any business transaction with friends. That will only spoil the relationship.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So it's amazing that the whole hero story is built around this. So how did you manage to make sure that, because it has to be fair, it has to be transparent, you can't upset anybody, but at the same time, it has to be business-like.
Yeah.
So, it would be very interesting to know how you manage.
So I think two things happened. One was because the position and the kind of shadow that my father and my uncles had on everybody, on the one hand ensured discipline, because they were very ethical and their integrity was unquestionable. So they would always do the right thing without even asking anybody. I think that was one thing which helped. Second was the conversation which I mentioned earlier to you, that when they started, the conversation was very clear that we may be cousins or friends or brothers outside. Inside, we are business associates. But the actual physical tool which worked also was that every supplier was allowed to supply to Hero Cycles and outside, and Hero Cycles would buy from them and from others. So they had to be competitive. It was not a matter of choice. If they were not competitive, they would start losing share of business. And that principle then was followed in mopeds and then in the motorcycles and in a number of other component businesses. And that helped a lot. It helped all the entire universe of components grew because many of them was companies were owned by us as a family. Even there, we maintained the same. The negotiation, in fact, often was the toughest amongst companies that were owned by us on both ends as buyers and sellers.
I mean, that reminds me of two things. One is in you know that in family business, we say that family is more like a harmonious, relationship-based business is competitive. And when you are wearing two hats, it becomes very difficult. And a lot of the family businesses get into trouble because they don't know how to distinguish between these two. You compromise on that. Okay. Whereas, I mean, much before anyone talked about family business principles, you were practicing this extensively. Okay. So this is one part. The other thing, I used to teach a case on Matsushita in its excellent days. Long ago. And they had a principle that any unit can buy from within the group or outside the group.
Correct.
So it's the same principle. That means that you have to be competitive and you have the freedom. You don't compromise on the quality because at the end, whether you are able to.
While the group units or connected units would always have an advantage, by the way. Other things being equal, you would give business to them.
Right.
It had to be competitive, but they had a ready advantage also at the same time. So I like to put it a little bit differently, what you said. See, family by itself is socialist. Business by itself, by its very nature, is capitalist. So they are actually go counter to each other. In the family, you want everyone to get the same treatment, equal compensation, etc., etc. In business, merit counts, you have to grow. So top line, bottom line is important. So they are an oxymoron when they try and work together.
Correct.
Which is why you find only a small percentage of family-owned businesses are able to be successful beyond a few generations. And I think that is a magic sauce which allows that to work.
Correct. And you set it as one of the basic principles, in the sense that when the friends and relatives were brought in, the rule was set very, very, very.
But I should also say, it's not as if we've never had problems, by the way. We've had problems in all the areas, in the family area, in the business area, in the quality areas, all of them we've experienced. All we said was that we have to keep learning each time. And something doesn't work, don't give it up. To try and do it differently.
Correct.
We've always done a lot of experimentation. Knowing fully well when you experiment so much, not everything will work. Some things will blow up in your face. Despite that, we've said continue to try new things.
Correct. And I mean, that's the only way, because any of the relationship, there will be issues, but instead of giving up or running away, say that let's work together and then solve it. And I think that the book also talks about the win-win. And I think it is either in the context quoting your father or Om Prakash ji said that the other person on the other side of the person on the other side of the table should be respected. He should also win. Isn't it? I think that is a win-win is the basic
philosophy. I've talked about the 5 or 6 things which became the business philosophy, which were their personal philosophies. This is certainly one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I
compared to all the people all the time.
I learned about it only when I started teaching management. Right. That negotiation has to be win-win. But what I'm saying is that many of
can be tough sometimes, by the way, because that's not the way people are mostly trained. That's not instinctively. That's not the way most people think.
Correct. Yeah. Let me get back to technology a little bit. And what I found was that your father, who led the group, was so to say had a far ahead of many others in terms of had the foresight in choosing the technology collaboration.
Correct.
Okay. So can you narrate 1 or 2 instances of this?
Sure. So I can go back all the way to the early 60s, actually. For a short time, the government allowed import of some machinery. Everything was very restrictive, if you remember, in those days. So he brought a chain plant from a company called Mass, a German company. He brought one complete set, and then we set up a machine tool plant inside our own factory, and then continued to make machines both cheaper than the one which came in and better than the one which had come from overseas, by improving functionality, improving process, etc. And this happened all the time. So he would always look for what is the latest new. So we never bought second-hand machines, for example. Unlike many other businesses, he's saying that's not where we should be saving. If you have to get technology, you have to get tomorrow's technology and not yesterday's. So the same thing happened when, for example, the collaboration with Honda was a big, it was a big thing at that time. When it reached the final stage of acceptance, Honda said, "We will work with you, but we will work with you on motorcycle and not on scooters." If you remember, they did two joint ventures, one with Kinetic for scooters and one with us for motorcycles. So then my father's first, he was taken aback. He actually called my uncle from there and he said, "Look, we had come for scooters and these guys are offering a motorcycle." So then finally he said, "That's okay, we'll make it work. But we will take a motorcycle which is far superior to what is going on right now in India. We will take a technology which for India is completely not common." That's how the 4-stroke in that size of 100cc motorcycle came. And many people actually criticized him at that time, saying, "What's wrong with you? Why would you take such a complex, first, why would you agree to a motorcycle? And then why would you take such a complex machine?" Of course, time has shown that his decision was not just good, it was outstanding.
And also, I would say that one more thing was that I think 2-3 aspects of it. One was his, foresight into the future, that technology is evolving and you have to have the best of technology, not yesterday's technology.
And all the time, by the way.
All the time. That's right. The second is that if you want to move from one orbit to the other orbit, you need to have that pressure, you need to have that opportunity to move into that. Okay. Correct. The third thing I've noticed is that Honda was such a phenomenal company, so respected, successful, and was the sort of icon of success across the world. And an Indian entrepreneur is very successful, but still he is from India. Going and sitting across on equal terms and saying that I need this, will you give me that kind of a thing? I think that was, I would say that very, very interesting, very confidently he did.
I guess it was a sense of self-belief, I think. And also that no matter what the circumstances, we will make it work.
Right.
That sense of confidence, because he had seen very tough times in many circumstances. All of them, my elder uncle, my younger uncle, all of them had seen very complex situations. And, one may think it's a historical story, but the reality is the references are equally relevant in today's world.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll come to this relevance of some of those things beyond what we have discussed, because all these things, whether it is JIT or its new avatars, or the design thinking or any new avatars of it, because it all keeps coming. So many of these things have been there, practiced there. And so one of the related questions is, as part of this transformation, how much of digitization you have introduced, whether it is, including robotics, AI kind of technologies across.
So first, let me tell you, automation is not new in our companies. Going as far back as 30, 35, maybe even 40 years, we had started introducing robotics and automation in the plants. So, and I'm not talking the bicycle business, even before the two-wheeler started, by the way.
Okay.
So even in the bicycle company, in Hero Cycles, in the paint shop, in the plating shop, in the welding shop, in the brazing shop, we had put robots in all these places. So anywhere, so our principle was very simple. Anything that is a health hazard for a human being, we will put robotics or machines. Anything which requires very high degree of accuracy, because human beings as a hand, if you're doing it manually, can move. And third, if it is very, very repetitive, there we would choose to put machines. And of course, we had worked out calculations of how much you can actually spend on this against a human being. And there were places, I can tell you, we also used to experiment. Some places we put robots and we found the people actually used to work better, so we took them off. But robotics and these kind of things are in our companies have been reasonably commonplace now for many decades, long before they were common in many other Indian companies. And now, of course, over the last some years, artificial intelligence is being used more and more. Machine learning is being used in a number of the areas. So attempting to use more and more sophisticated tools. As the businesses have spread globally, they also have to be globally competitive all the time. So they are trying to get the best practices of what we have learned and what one can learn from anywhere else.
Right. And I remember reading that when the Honda team came, they were quite surprised to see the best practices, including the JIT, not in their terms, but otherwise practiced. I mean, across the factory, across the company, and the people relationship, and also the embeddedness between the technology and human relationship.
Yep.
I think that's also phenomenal. Okay, so talking about Honda, I mean, I remember reading about it, the separation of the alliance, the relationship, and
Yes.
it was a rude shock to everybody, whoever was looking at, because people, all of us, I mean, including as a student of strategy, I used to think that this is a lifelong relationship and it is a win-win for everybody. And why should it break up, kind of thing? And I remember reading somewhere where if I remember right, your father said that I gave everything to this relationship.
Yep.
And I feel very sad about this. Okay.
Yep.
So do you have any thoughts on this? How did this happen, or how did the family respond to that? So I have another related question, is that many companies or many families would give up, saying that we can't do anything more because Honda is Honda, so they have taken away anything. But you didn't. More like a phoenix. I would say that not even phoenix, but you, because you did not lose. Yep. You came back, or you did not go down. You were able to address the challenges with confidence and with success. So these two things. One is about the Hero Honda breakup, and then how did you respond?
Sure. I'll talk about both. So first, to clarify, I'm no longer involved in the business myself. I used to be earlier, but I'm not now. Pawan, my brother, is the chairman and MD. He runs it now. First, I should tell you, this was a wonderful partnership, as you said. Honda is an amazing company, outstanding in the depth of its knowledge and research and innovation and thinking. The processes, the planning processes, they're absolutely fantastic. So first 10 to 12 years, we learned a lot from them. But I have to say, in the last 10, 12, 15 years of the partnership, they also took many ideas from here into their global network. They could, because that is the kind of partnership we had. They learned from us, we learned from them. And because the culture of innovation, again, going back to the DNA of our organization from the bicycle and the moped days, the DNA was the same. So with Honda, it got even more enriched. So it learned a lot from them. And in fact, when the second plant was set up, in Gurgaon, the first plant was almost entirely designed by Honda. The second was designed entirely by our team here. So the president of Honda came for the inaugural, and he was completely surprised to see the plant. He was happy, and he was a little bit amazed. He was happy to see such a fantastic plant in India. And then he was asking his guys, why did we not think of some of these ideas? That was the first time an assembly line was actually turned on its head. The concept was changed. That further improved the JIT and further improved efficiency and productivity. Now, over a period of time, what started happening was that the interest started pulling a little bit in different directions, because Honda had set up its own 100% subsidiary in India as well. Initially, when Hero Honda was only making motorcycles, they started with scooters, and subsequently they also started making motors. While it was not across the board, but it started competing with each other. Also, there were some restrictions on Hero Honda as a part of the original agreement on export and R&D, etc. And we had, over a period of time, become the largest company in the world. So it made sense that this company itself should be selling in multiple places, should be doing R&D, etc. On those issues, we could not come to a common understanding. And mutually, both of us decided then that it may be better to go independent so that both can do what they want to do. And so while publicly, of course, this was not apparent, but we got time, we planned for it. We did a lot of homework. We did a lot of scenario planning. What if this happens? What if that happens? And we were quite equipped. As you know, the transition was very smooth, and the company was number one at that time. Today continues to be number one. In fact, it's getting more market share in the last couple of months. So, and there were a lot of things. You were not the only one. Many analysts that time said, how will the company even survive? How will they sell a product without Honda's brand, its engineering, its design, its R&D? So the company went and set up relationships and design and engineering in Austria and in Japan and in UK and in just so many places, and set up just outside Jaipur the most elaborate two-wheeler R&D center in the world. So the idea was to be bold and think beyond yourself.
Right.
If you want to be a leader, you have to think like a leader.
Absolutely. And it's also interesting because, I mean, I've looked at many JVs, joint ventures within India and outside. And most joint ventures break up through sort of an acrimonious divorce. And what you're saying is that once you realize that the strategies or ambitions are different, or it is important to sit down, find out how to make it win-win for the separation also.
Yeah,
and I think
you're right. Otherwise, it destroys value for everyone.
Correct.
It does not benefit anyone.
Correct.
So if you just use, again, plain logic, unfortunately, as I say, common sense is not very common. It's the same with logic. If you apply logic, you will actually come to a win-win always.
Correct. Let me switch gears and come to the next gen, on the family side.
Yep.
The book talks about a lot of grooming for when you were young or your generation was young and all.
Yep.
And there was continuous process of grooming was there. So how is that grooming happening across the different branches of the Munjal family now in general, although there may be variations, but
yes.
And also, what do you tell the audience about the role of grooming in a family business?
It's absolutely critical. So as you said, first I got the grooming, and then I had the charge and role of helping many others in the family, bringing the next generation in. So there were 2 or 3 principles that we used. And again, I should tell you as a clarification beforehand, it did not always work, but it worked most times, by the way.
Okay.
And you can see whoever went through the full cycle actually benefited. So one, we said, once you learn your passion, your interest, please go and get yourself educated in the best institution that you can of your interest. And then come back. And if you're still interested to join the family business, then go and work outside somewhere first.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Demonstrate to us that you have the work ethic, that if you make a mistake, somebody will fire you. If you don't hand in an assignment in time, if you don't come to work in time, that you'll get ticked off. And once you've done that, then you come back into the family business, and you have 2 options. Either in an existing company, you start at reasonably low level and you climb up, but you must work for a while and demonstrate to yourselves and your colleagues what capabilities you have and what you can build. And if you want to do something independent, then we can look at a small startup only. That's the only way you can do something independent, not otherwise. And then we tried also a system of appraisal where we tried to keep the appraisal stricter for members of the family than it was for an equivalent manager, a non-family manager, rather than the other way around. So that, because if some of them expect to become leaders over time, then they have to demonstrate that they are actually better than others.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that again, this is one area where, I've been interacting with business families in India and outside for many years. And very often children assume that there is a seat for me, and this is a sort of, I use the word employment exchange. So this is the third area. So whether I study or not, it doesn't matter. And the family also tells them that you go and study and then come back and then join the family business. And it's only well-governed families have this kind of clarity and the communication. And also strictly following that
No, but that's what I'm saying. It doesn't always work. You try to do that.
Hmm.
It works most times. Doesn't always work. Sometimes it can be very, very complex. Can be very difficult sometimes to explain to a member of the family why her or his son or nephew or daughter is being given this role and not the other role, a smaller
Right.
role, a bigger role. So there are challenges
there-
with,
Of course, there will be challenges, but you
handled
believed in them.
with
That's
dexterity
Hmm.
and sensibly and with good communication is the key to this.
correct. Correct.
And sometimes not saying things is also good communication, by the way. So you
Yeah.
have to know when to say something and when not to say something as well. Yeah.
So that takes me to the next about the values. Okay, you
Mhm.
have. I mean, it is there right through the book, and somewhere it is discussed in detail also. So can you elaborate on at least a couple of the key values and how you? I mean, the reason is that when I look at families or when I work with families, they write down 5 or 6 values.
Yeah.
And these are values to be hung on the table, not to be practiced. But
Correct.
what I see is that you have been living some of the values. So can you elaborate on a couple of those values?
So first, I should tell you, there is no reason for us not to live them because they have demonstrated such an amazing benefit and advantage.
Hmm.
So it would be foolish to not practice them. And again, it gets harder and harder over a period of time. Sometimes when life is more complex, regulation can create an issue. Multiple members of the family can have different views. So, but going back to what these values are. So starting first is that our biggest asset is people.
Hmm.
And therefore building relationships and retaining relationships is very critical for us. Now, when I'm saying biggest asset is people, please remember, this is the only asset that we have which appreciates with time. Every other other asset that we have, buildings, machines, technologies, and we built some fantastic buildings, by the way. We have some of the best buildings for factories in the world. We've used some of the most sophisticated technologies in the world, but they all depreciate.
Hmm.
The only one with time and experience which is appreciating is people. The second value you mentioned yourself is on humility, that we have to appreciate that not all the credit for this work can go to us. There are many, many people involved, and many times circumstances allow us to get to do things which we may not otherwise be able to do. It's important to be humble, to be realistic, and to practical. Third is to try to be fair to all the people all the time. And this is a very tough one, by the way. This is the win-win that you were talking about. It's very, very tough sometimes. When people say, sometimes, a senior manager would come, he's saying, sir, you tell me, if I can get a good deal for my company, why do I have to be concerned about the guy I'm making the deal with? Why do I have to concern myself? So I try and explain to them that this is something where you will get the dividend repeatedly. If you make a good deal where both of you are benefiting, he or she will come back to you over and over and over again, and you will continue to benefit, both of you.
Hmm.
And the next one, so there are in the same, next one is about concern for the environment. And this environment is of two types. One is the ecology, air quality, water quality, etc. So again, I'm going back to Hero Cycles. In Hero Cycles, 40 years ago, we put an effluent treatment plant.
Oh.
Long before there was any regulation, it was fashionable. Even the technology was not available. So my father got this technology from England and had to get an engineer from Chandigarh to come and build that plant. And people were saying, what's wrong with you? Why are you wasting money, on these things? And the second environment is of communities and societies and people around us. Because it is important, again, to realize that the amount of goodwill you get from good relationship of people in your vicinity, it cannot be measured. It is impossible to measure that. So wherever we set up any plant or any office or any operation, we would always set up a school or a college or a hospital or a vocational skill center or a clean drinking water center or an integrated village center or a series of projects that we have. Something or the other would always go up where the local communities either get engaged or directly benefit from. So this is the kind of philosophies. They sound like motherhood statements, but the reality is they sound like motherhood statements because they actually work.
Right. And let me, I just remembered that in Danny Miller's and Isabella Miller's famous book on the long-lasting families in Europe, 100-year-old family business. So they had found that, they had concluded that there are 4 components of it. They call it 4 C's. One is that the command, which means the entrepreneurship and strategy part of it. The second is that the community. Okay, the community with the team.
Yeah.
Okay, and then yet another is the connect with the society. Okay, and what you are talking about is the connect with the society,
Yeah.
and the philanthropy is natural for you. And in fact, let me just read out one sentence from your book.
Yeah.
You have written that the responsible businesses are those that give purpose as much weight as the pursuit of profit.
Yep.
Okay, so the philanthropic initiatives were there from the very beginning. Were they also two things? One is that were this coming from the Arya Samaj kind of roots you had, and also the upbringing, and also how did it get manifest in some of the other activities now, including education and others?
Sure. So first, I think possibly part of it came from the Arya Samaj, but I'm not sure if it was only the Arya Samaj. It was also the environment that they built around themselves. And all of us kind of grew up in that environment. So this was the most natural thing to do. So in fact, just before this, I've just finished talking to all the teachers of two of our schools. Yesterday, I addressed all the teachers in Doon School. The day before that, I addressed all of the faculty in our university. So the last few days, I've been doing this every day. So we actually picked a few areas. So we do it in 2-3 ways, by the way. And we do this at 3 levels. One is what the companies do, which is today come to be called CSR. Second is what we do collectively as a family, only as a family. And third is what any one of us does individually. And we encourage all 3, by the way. And it's not today, we've always done this. And the areas that we've involved is education, healthcare, clean drinking water, gender issues. And I'm personally very involved in the arts and culture.
Right.
Because as a country, as a region, as a part of the world, which has the richest cultural heritage in the world, we've allowed lots of it to decline and almost die. So we're trying to see how we can revive some of them, create more exposure, get more interest, especially amongst younger people, get more patronage in this, use this as a learning platform. So there are multiple initiatives that we have launched. In fact, ISB probably is going to be involved. We're launching a new ideathon for a new center that we are building on arts and culture.
Okay.
Yeah, we're trying to crowdsource ideas for that. But you're right that it's not philanthropy to show. The purpose is more important, and also how you do it is, by the way, equally important.
Right. And I'm coming towards the end of the conversation. We have to have some. We'll break it and then hopefully continue the conversation later. But how do you see the hero group of the 70s, 80s, and 90s different, fundamentally different from what it is now?
So let me do both, a little bit of different and a little bit of why there's a continuity in this. So one is, it is still very entrepreneurial.
Right.
Now, by the way, it's not one group. As you know, as I mentioned, it's been restructured twice over. Yeah. And if I look at the sum of the parts, so what we did was, we had this conversation. Actually, I think I've written about this in the book as well. I spoke to both my father and my uncle. I said, look, I think we should proactively do a restructuring of ownership of the businesses, because too many businesses end up destroying themselves because of the differences in the family. And they actually both got annoyed with me, saying, look, businesses are doing so well and the family relationships so good. And people give an example of ours. I said, exactly. Nobody thinks of restructuring at this time. Normally people start when there is already a problem, either in the family relations or in the business itself. And then everyone pulls in different direction. And certainly there's no chance of a win-win, by the way, at that time.
Right.
So reluctantly initially, but finally they both enthusiastically agreed with me that if it's going to be good for the family and the business, then we must do it. And we did a proactive restructuring ourselves. So today, I think we had 32 companies at that time. Today, if I total up, it's more than 50 companies in multiple ownership. And many of them have grown, many have become global companies, etc. So some of them have changed their style of working. Some of them consider the old style maybe either old-fashioned or maybe not in tune with what is required in their businesses right now. So from a little bit more, let me, for want of a better word, from a traditional Oriental or a Japanese style, shifting a little bit more to an American style. So more transactional. That is one change I have seen across some of the enterprises. I have seen much more adoption of technology today than there was, while we were always a little bit ahead than others in technology. But I'm seeing a lot more of that. And I'm seeing a lot more professionalization take place in many of the businesses. Earlier, we had many more of the members of the family involved. So I don't think professionals saw that much headroom for themselves. So today, many companies are run completely professionally. Not all of them, but many of them are. So these are some of the changes I can see taking place in the overall families businesses right now.
And in COVID, everybody says that this is life is going to be different, everything is going to be different, and the new normal kind of thing.
Yeah.
How do you see the relevance of? We have covered a lot of these, but in essence, when you look at it, the book and its message, how is that making sense in the post-COVID kind of scenario?
So one of the things we did do, as soon as this crisis hit us, so we very quickly hunkered up and started working with the authorities, with the governments, with the regulators. Number of us, I myself did some work with some of the governments, working with either through CII or through other institutions or on my own or our own companies, helping in various ways, in helping in beefing up capacities of healthcare, ICUs, beds, ventilators, protective gears, then working with some of the departments to see how they manage information and data, how testing is done. So that was one set of initiatives that we launched. And then, of course, we launched multiple initiatives across various companies to offer kitchens and food to the people who were displaced. And these, that was a big humanitarian crisis going on at that time. So that was the second thing we did. Third thing we did was we said, let each company go back and do some soul searching. This is also an opportunity. The crisis is already here. There's no point cribbing about it. Right. Let's see if we can find something to benefit out of this. So one of the things we have done as a group, and many times when there has been a crisis or a slowdown, we've gone and invested and increased capacities. So this is completely counter to what one would normally imagine. It's counterintuitive, but it works. And it's worked many times for us. So the one thing we did was, how can our companies become more efficient? How can technology and automation become a much bigger part of the businesses? And how can we start working on a completely new cost base based on a zero-based activity itself? These are some of the things we did. And we passed the same message to all our partners, dealers, distributors, suppliers. I mean, I'm saying I'm talking about now, there are different entities now. Right. I'm not involved in all of them, but each of them actually started looking inwards to create improvement in their system and operations.
So shall I assume that, because the book doesn't cover the post division, the Hero Moto group, Hero Moto Corp. Okay, yes. And current status and all, because that is
correct. That's post the period of the book. Yeah.
So are you? The way I look at it is that maybe in your next book you will have more coverage of what happened, including what you did with the COVID and post-COVID kind of scenario. Because I'm sure that you will have a lot more to say about what are the changes happening.
I can't say myself right now, but the publisher is expecting some more stuff. He's actually already indicated to me what they would like to see.
So what's your message to the listeners of this session?
So first, let me say a big thank you to all those who helped me put this book together. Many people have been involved in this, starting from people in my own office, Jaideep in my office, Ashwini in my office, who were putting all of this together. Then members of the family who I consulted, many of the friends, many of my father's colleagues and friends. So, and Mr. Rai in Ludhiana, who's our vice chairman at Hero Cycles, In fact, he was also going to write a book, so we were both planning to do it together at one time. And he has some significant contributions on this. So that is one set. Then people who have helped with publishing it, etc., HarperCollins, the others, and the team which is doing these events with Ajay and Anshul and Vasundhara and a lot of them. I think all of them, and now Prakash in my office. So first, I want to say a big thank you to all of them. And to the people who are listening, one is, do read this book and make of it what you will. By the way, it's not necessarily only for a lesson. It's also a nice storybook. So you can enjoy it as a storybook. You can take something from it, and it's got many experiential lessons. Actually, it's not preaching. I hope it's not preachy, because it's talking about the actual experience.
It is not.
Of what we went through, what the family went through before us, what my parents and my uncles and aunts went through. So it's a real life experiences on how you handle different kinds of issues, challenges, crises, and opportunities. So I think from that point of view, it is relevant for literally almost anyone to read. And all I would say is that for each one of us, life has offered an amazing opportunity. What we make of it depends entirely on us. We can crib and complain, or we can say, I'm going to make something of this. Whatever I have available, I'm going to make something of this. And there's something magical in life. God gives us this amazing ability to say, the more you do, the more you get a chance to do. And the harder you work, the luckier you get. So people have demonstrated this over and over again, all over the world, over many centuries. So again, without sounding preachy, all I would say is there is a unique opportunity in this world to enjoy the journey itself. So if you do the right thing, the journey itself is the best part of life.
Great. Sunil, thank you so much. I always have enjoyed interacting, talking to you, and also reading the book was a phenomenal joy. And especially I really enjoyed this discussion. So thank you so much for...
Thank you to you. Thank you to ISP, and thank you to everyone who's listening. Yeah.
And I also encourage all the people who have been listening to this conversation to get a copy of the book and read it leisurely. It's you can always make a lot of notes on the side. A lot of takeaways are there from both the business side and the family side. I would say the institution building process. Okay, so thank you so much, Sunil, for putting it together, and all the very best to you and the family and all the initiatives here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.